and I'm just going to hit this button. So now you are live on YouTube and Facebook, and I'm going to disappear, but I will be coming back shortly.
No problem at all.
All right.
There we go. But without further ado, True Beast and Echo of Beast, this year's
International
Master and Slave winners. Okay.
Thank you.
So, like I said, on FetLife, True Beast, Echo _ Beast. We just go by Beast and Echo. We are the 2022 International Master and Slave couple. My understanding is there's not a whole lot of leather contests going on here, so that may not make any sense or mean anything to you. That's okay.
Because we're going to explain it later.
We're going to talk about some of that.
Just because it's easy, it's not just us here. This is our wonderful wife, Liv. Wait. She hates it, so thank you.
It's always fun to embarrass people. All right, so we actually have a leather history class that we do that takes up a full hour and a half. And then we were also asked to do some conversation about the title track and how that all looks and works and all the things. And then we're supposed to do that in an hour. So we kind of wanted to leave it open to y'all a little bit and find out what specifically are you interested in hearing. Because we can talk more on the history side, more on the title side. We can kind of do an overview of both, or we can do this as a Q&A and kind of let y'all lead where we go with that if you prefer.
And I promised him that English people are not as stuffy as he may have seen. So it's now all down to you to prove that I'm right. And I usually get to say this. So if I say a word that you don't recognize, I've slipped into English brain. So we're going to go with, if he says a word that you don't recognize, he slipped into American brain, because it's not the same language, no matter what they say. And if you don't understand one of the words that we've used, please let us know. Or, to be honest, half the time I'll just translate in time as it's happening. But if there is anything that you don't understand, please do let us know.
It's honestly been great. We spent the first few days of our trip up kind of in her hometown. We're up in Biddeford.
North Devon. No one here knows where I'm from. Tiny little town.
Yes. So she'll be talking to her family.
Did you say purple?
No, I said no problem.
Oh, okay. I was like,
I'm from Southwest, so it's only across the water.
yes.
Yeah, we've spent some time up there, and so it's been kind of fun. She's talking to her family or her friends or things like that. And every now and then I'll just kind of look at her and give her a puzzled look, and she'll like decode, and it's been helpful. So is there anyone that came with something specific? They're like, I really want to learn about this thing, or did y'all just kind of wander in and like, let's see what they say.
Let's see what they do in America.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to hear what you actually, your title and what have you on that. Because what we have here in the UK, I can obviously share with you sort of on the title holders and what have you in the UK and Europe side of things. So it will be interesting to hear your take on it and what your understanding is across the title holders and your concept of that. So
Great.
That works.
We can absolutely do that.
as well, and a little bit of your history and what have you.
Well, what weekend to do it other than the 50th year of London Pride?
Yes.
We have good timing.
So, how many of you here are familiar with kind of the leather world in general?
Okay.
And how many of you have heard leather before and really don't know what that means? How many of you, as far as you know, leather is just a material that you make leather. Okay, so
we gauge where we are.
that works. So if you've been around leather circles, you've probably heard, for the most part, it kind of began in that World War II, post-World War II era, at least in the States, and I don't know how different this was for y'all. But we had, even up until fairly recently, our military was don't ask, don't tell. If you were gay, we kind of pretended we didn't know and let you go on with your business. But if for some reason it became a thing and came out, they were dismissed. And while that wasn't necessarily the official policy for many years, even going back to pre-World War II, that was how they functioned. And so they actually had a thing called either a blue discharge or you got your blue paper. And it was more or less either psychiatric reasons or some kind of deep personality issue that they decided you were not going to make a proper military person. And that led to a lot of these folks being dismissed in the major port cities. And so we have, San Francisco is probably the most famous, but San Francisco, New York, Chicago kind of became like a dumping ground for the military, getting rid of these soldiers that they decided were not appropriate. And that led to kind of these cities building up. My own path through leather came through the motorcycle club world. And so anytime I talk about leather history, for me at least, it's important to talk about that crossover. And so during that time with World War II, there was a lot going on with the motorcycle companies, Harley Davidson being the kind of the one that lasted. But they won the U.S. military contract. And in, I think it was 1941, 100% of their production went into the war effort. It was, they ended up shipping about 90,000 motorcycles to be used in the military. And it was known as like the bike that won the war, things like that. So you did have a lot of these soldiers that were coming back, gay or not, that's what they were used to. So when they came back, they kind of gravitated that direction. And so that kind of led to, especially in these port cities with San Francisco and things like that, led to a lot of the gay men looking for that brotherhood, that camaraderie, that connection, and also the thrill of it, right? And so they would seek out the motorcycles, they would seek out their friends. Again, they were kind of concentrated in these areas based on the way the military was functioning.
Another thing to consider, it wasn't just when they came home and they were looking for that group again. A lot of people aren't actually aware that when the concentration camps were liberated, that they were, if you weren't gay. If they found out you were gay, even our own American allies or whichever allied country sent them back in. Yeah. And they were kept there. And instead of wearing the Star of David, they were put in a pink triangle. And that's where the triangle comes from. It's a lot of our gay bars, a lot of our lesbian bars as well, will use the pink triangle as a icon, logo, whatever word it is that you want to use there. Because it was a nod back to that, because a lot of our troops were put back into concentration camps for years. So when they came home, finding these groups and finding the people that they could be with and they could trust was incredibly important. It wasn't just about getting into leather, it was about that safety piece.
And because of the way a lot of that happened, it really kind of formed how especially urban gay life developed in the States. Again, that the concentration around those particular port cities, folks seeking out that connection, things like that. The government kind of inadvertently created these areas where gay culture started to grow. At the same time, a lot of the stereotypes that we'd been exposed to prior were the idea that gay men in particular were all flamboyant and the confirmed bachelor and things like that. And that as these men were coming back from having seen some terrible things, having bonded with their brothers, that wasn't a thing that really spoke to them. And so there were two things going on. One was that pushback against that culture, saying like that's not us, that doesn't fit us. We're masculine. We're in some cases like super masculine, and also the culture around them wasn't ready to accept it. So you had folks going out, getting beaten up, getting killed. Police were harassing them. How many of you want to go and pick a fight with a guy dressed head to toe in black leather, looking like he just stepped out of the Hell's Angels or what have you? So there's an element of safety in it too. especially when you had them grouping together in these clubs, riding together, things like that. And any of you that are familiar with kind of the motorcycle culture, we do runs. And that could be a poker run where you stop and hit a few bars. It could be we're going to take off for the day and ride 100 miles and stop and hang out, go camping and come back. Could be any number of things. But these groups would end up basically kind of adopting a home bar. And this is where we're going to meet up. We'll go for a run, we'll come back and have a beer. And those kind of morphed into what became our leather bars. As that kind of picked up, especially as we started hitting things like the 50s, a little before my time, but still interesting. Anyone remember Marlon Brando with the Wild One? That like kind of iconic image of him leaning back against the motorcycle with the leather cap on, the leather jacket. And especially for the time, having just come out of World War II, the country really trying to figure itself out, that really became something that spoke to people, again, across the spectrum, gay, straight, what have you. It became a thing that really empowered people. And so gay culture latched onto that as well. And that idea of the leather clad, the leather cap that is now kind of our master's cover or master's cap, all kind of started to develop. I just lost my train of thought.
We'll talk about neurodivergency in our next class.
It's relatively quick because
I know.
Too slow. But by the 1960s, you really had kind of that leather scene taking off, and it expanded beyond the motorcycle. So folks that had either no interest, no desire, in some cases maybe no ability to ride a motorcycle, still saw that iconic image, and it was something that spoke to them and something they were hungry for. And so you ended up with folks that maybe they've never touched a motorcycle in their life, but now they're wearing leather jackets and leather caps and leather chaps or leather pants. And especially in these kind of urban centers that had grown up and developed, these bars were there. And whether it was originally, something that a specific motorcycle club or even a few motorcycle clubs had kind of adopted as their own, the culture within that kind of sprang up, and you'd have people that, again, had nothing to do with motorcycles that were still showing up dressed the same. And just the smell of it, I mean, even just upstairs, or not upstairs, but out in the vendor areas you're walking through. I don't know how many of you kind of walk through, especially the areas where they have clothing or there's all these like Mexican floggers and things, and you get that smell.
And there's like other smells that also happened in gay bars, and it still does. The leather gay community or the leather gay bars in the States, some of them still have deodorant policies. You are not allowed to wear any aftershave, any deodorant. There is someone up at the front door sniffing armpits. And if you smell like you've just showered, you are sent on your way.
It's not as common anymore, because now, especially in the US, I don't know if this is something similar here, but if someone shows up to a commercial establishment and is told they're not dressed right, or they're in some way undesirable and sent home, people are upset. They feel discriminated against. Especially in the US, we like to sue everybody for everything. So a lot of that
they are successful when they do.
So a lot of that has kind of died out, but especially just in Denver, where we're from, we had a bar called the Triangle years back, and they had a posted sign on the wall. You had to be wearing a certain number of pieces of leather, no colognes, no deodorants, none of that. If you showed up in tennis shoes or loafers, you were sent home. and the bouncers sniff their armpits. There's still an element of that culture, but there's not a lot of bars that are able to really enforce that as a policy. And so instead, it kind of relies on peer pressure of the folks that show up to try to continue that.
Why is that a thing? Why was it a thing?
As far as like the smell or the dress code or
the smell thing.
Like, what's the purpose of not allowing people to have? Okay.
A lot of it, especially if you're fragrant and floral and all the things, that's not like rugged and manly and raw. And,
kind of comes back to that homo masculinity piece or that hyper masculinity piece, so either term. Because again, smelling all flowery, and don't get me wrong, he always smells fabulous, and I love it. But it doesn't necessarily feed into that grunge masculine thing that they were going for. And I think it was probably a person's preference, and then it became a thing. Just like a lot of traditions or ideas that we have, it was one group was doing it, and everyone's like, "Ooh, that's hot. Let's do that."
And there is that sense, and even if you go to bars, you can go to like we have there is also a bar. It's in the same location called the Triangle in Denver now. It is not the same thing it used to be. Triangle used to be a old school leather bar. It's now kind of our twink bar.
Yeah, if you go and you're not smooth as a dolphin and wearing pastel board shorts, like it's not your bar.
It's a very different consumer base than they're pursuing. But if you go to a bar like that, everything's kind of shiny and clean and sparkling and all that. There's something about that, like you walk into a leather bar and you kind of know right away because it's a little dirty.
Yeah.
It's probably a little dim. It's kind of grungy. It's that dive bar thing, but that's just kind of part of it. And anything that's too pretty and too shiny and too new and too perfect just doesn't really fit. And so the scent thing kind of fits with that. And there are some people in that environment that like would love nothing better than for you to come straight from the gym, dripping with sweat, and walk in there and get that musky.
Just walk around with your arms in the air.
But then bikers don't smell flowery, do they?
What was that, sorry?
Bikers don't smell flowery because my friends are bikers and they smell like the musk and the leather and you got but so why should leather men smell all flowery?
Well, and even the community around boot blacking is quite recent in comparison to the community in general. This idea that our leathers have to be perfect and beautifully buffed and all of the things. Don't get me wrong, I love our boot blacks. And they do an absolutely stellar job, but there's that missing piece of like, so are we getting rid of this stuff, or do you want to tell me the story? Are we keeping it? Are we highlighting it? Does it like not everything has to be a high polish? We actually have our title brother, who was the Colorado boot black Todd. He spoke about that in his speech for International Boot Black of he's not a caretaker of your leathers. He's a steward of your stories because he's asking about them as he's doing your stuff. He wants to hear that so that he can use that and understand it more in how he's approaching the leather. Because before he was ex-military, right? Yeah. No? Oh, well, he does all of the very high shine, pretty, all of the stuff. And he's even had a journey around that of like, oh, no, are we keeping this all jacked up? Like, tell me about the scene you did that led to that scuff. And then he gets to hold that for you and make sure that it stays. It's part of our history, regardless of who you are or what you're doing there. Like, those stories go with him. He is a steward of them.
And so as that scene developed, we hit the 70s, and you had, especially in the U.S.
It was here too. It's okay.
It started earlier, but because of obscenity laws and things like that, we didn't really get it until then. But things like the Tom of Finland artwork, where you have that iconic, hot biker guy with the
impossible body shape, like those Wonder Woman from the 60s. Like, that's literally not possible unless you have shin implants and take out 4 of your ribs. That's not possible. Tom of Finland was essentially the gay leather version of it, and instead of taking out ribs, it's adding like 12 inches around to his dick, and like it's still like an upside down V, and like everything about it is just impossible. But oh my god, like right.
And then even the the village people
Mm-hmm.
had their biker member, right? And it kind of hit mainstream. People started to see that image of the leather person,
The
big mustache, the porn stash, and not necessarily tied to the motorcycle itself, but that idea, right? And so it was about that time in the 70s where the very first leather contest started. And the original ones, as especially as title holders, we'd like to tell you a story about how there's this like lofty ideal of all the things that they wanted to do. But really it was about selling beer. It was about bringing people into the bar. It was about having a good time. Let's do a thing that's going to attract a crowd. We'll sell more beer. We'll bring people into the bar. We'll make some money. The folks can have some fun, and we'll, if we're, what's the name of the actual club here? Not LAM, but the
Revolution.
Revolution.
Okay.
Right? So if Revolution were a leather bar, then we could crown Mr. Revolution, and it didn't go any further. For a year, they got bragging rights. Probably got laid a little more often than they otherwise might have.
If you know the hanky code, Silver LeMay is the star fucker hanky, and they like to have sex with the people that are the title holders or the high up presenters or the very well known
Celebrity.
Yes.
So they started kind of there, and then obviously something pretty significant happened by the end of the 70s, early 80s. Any guesses? Yeah.
And then they turned into fundraisers.
So we started, end of the 70s, 1980 with what they call gay cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And within a year or so, GRID was the word being thrown around. And I think by 83, it was finally identified as AIDS, and that's the name that stuck. But they found it was a great way to bring people together and raise money, because a lot of these folks, their families would have nothing to do with them.
Well, they literally, that's another thing that's often missed in the conversation of the lesbians that were around at the time. Because a lot of them were going to the houses and pretending to be the girlfriend so that they could clear it out and make sure that the stuff that they knew was meaningful was saved. And that's really where the idea of gifted leather came from. So we have this idea now that like you earn your leathers. You've got to earn, well, at least in the States we do. I see a lot of confused faces. So in the States, there's this idea. It's not for everyone and it's not a hard and fast rule. But there's this idea of earning your first piece of leather before you're allowed to buy your own. And you have to do something with this particular group to say that you were worthy of wearing leather. And we kind of took that and went a little bit wild with it. But the reality of it wasn't about earning it. It was about finding someone that was the right size to make sure that this leather went on somewhere. It wasn't thrown away, it wasn't discarded, it wasn't thought of as less than or given to a charity shop because their friend wore this every night at the bar, and it was a part of their identity. So we have to find a way that this is still useful and being used by someone. So it wasn't about like, oh, well, you've earned your boots now. It was like, what size feet are you? Great. These are so-and-so's boots. I really want you to have them to make sure that they're still walking into this bar.
And the reality was, it wasn't any different then than it is now. Leather's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, they spent a lot of money on these, but if their family came in and cleaned up the place, that stuff got burnt.
Mm-hmm.
It got thrown
Everything.
away.
Yeah.
And especially in the early days of AIDS, there was, no one had any idea how this was happening, how it was transmitted. If I touch their clothes, am I going to get it? I don't know. Let's burn it.
Literally people walking in and like now what we consider COVID PPE, just to pick up clothes. And they would literally take the entire apartment, put it on the lawn and torch the lot because they weren't sure what was happening or where it was coming from.
And I'm sure there's also that element of, kind of shame and blame and that kind of thing, where it's like, well, if Uncle Ray wasn't like that, if he wasn't one of those people, this wouldn't have happened to him, and all of this stuff represents that to him. That's good. But again, that did lead to the contest kind of shifting gears. And so in '79, we had both IML and
International Mr. Leather.
Sorry. And side note, because Echo mentioned boot blacks a little earlier. I don't know how many of you know, but IML just recently happened, and with International Mr. Leather every year, you also have the International Boot Black Contest.
And he's yours.
Yes.
So Alistair took it home for the UK. So
does anyone know the last
I'm a
time?
little bit better because a good friend of mine also.
Yeah. Does anyone know the last time that someone here won the international? This isn't a trick. I don't know the answer. I'm genuinely curious. No? Okay. We'll have to find out. I can't remember the last time the international title was. What was that?
It's quite a number of years.
Yeah, it's usually.
Come even to Europe.
Yes.
It's been a number of years.
I was going to say, generally, this is something that we're going to talk to you about in a minute. The international titles generally stay in the continental US. So Mr. comes out of the US quite regularly, but that's huge. They have 100 people competing for that title on a weekend. And that's not just people from the States. It's literally like Mr. Netherlands, Mr. Berlin, Mr. this, Mr. that. It's not just one title holder per country. It's if you win a Mr. title, you can go to IML if you want to. So they end up with they get like a 5-minute interview because they've just got to be like, huh?
From Europe, you can't. You can't do that if you're in Europe.
Oh, you have to have the country?
No, in Europe you have to be part of the European Confederation of Motorcycle Clubs, the ECMC, and if you're not, you can't go to IML. So there is within Europe a sort of link to IML. So
I don't like that.
So again, I mean, for myself, I'm quite involved with the ECMC and sort of the title holders within Europe and the UK as well. So a lot of that element, you've got to have that link to IML to allow you to head that.
I'm really glad that you're here. You taught us something today.
And it's amazing. IML have really sort of come along and sort of into Europe and spoken with a lot of the title holders to try and broaden their appeal to Europe and further afield to Australasia and all of that, and out to Japan and what have you, to get more title holders. That it's not just from the US that they're there.
That's why we're here.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank
You're
you.
welcome. And then one other significant thing happened as a result of the AIDS crisis kind of really decimating not just the gay community, but leather in particular, is we have this myth that has been around for years of a group called the Old Guard. I don't know how many of you have heard about, like, I was trained in Old Guard leather or any of these things. And as best we can tell, and I don't know that anyone has the right answer, because the reality was, a lot of this stuff was going on at a time where we weren't as connected as we are now. People weren't sharing information like they do now. But as best we can tell, a lot of the really heavy players during the late 70s, early 80s, people that would have been potentially Old Guard if that was a thing, were also the folks that got hit earliest and hardest by AIDS. So we lost a lot of that history as those people passed away. And what that left us with was a lot of the people that were on the periphery that weren't necessarily the ones involved in doing the thing, but they knew people. They know these guys at the bar, and they watched them do things.
They had this story from this guy.
They may have been invited to parties at someone's house. They've been around the community, but weren't necessarily those heavy players. And they would basically describe what they saw. And so we ended up with a lot of these ideas of things like burned leather, where you have to be in the community for so long and reach a certain point before you can earn your boots.
And covers.
And then the covers. I don't know how many of you here know who Party German is. In the States, he's a fairly popular leather educator. And he's one of those guys, he's been around for a long time, he lived through a lot of this stuff. And he wrote an article that's pretty commonly shared when the topic of specifically earned covers comes up.
Really pisses him off.
Because there are definitely different trains of thought. Some people put meaning behind it and decide, I want to do a thing and earn my cover, and whether that's a mentorship or being recognized by peers in your community and having them present you with a cover that you have then earned and has meaning for you. That's awesome. There are other people who say, I feel like a fucking god in a leather hat, so I bought a leather hat and I wear it because I feel good, and I go to the bar and I get laid because I look good in my leather hat. And that's all it has to be. I'm one of those people that there's a part of me that really wishes I could walk into a leather room and look around and tell exactly who was who by what they were wearing. Like, oh yeah, they've earned all of their leather. They've only earned their boots. They're wearing a cover, so I know what that means. It's crap. You never know.
Well, even with us.
Yeah, people may have bought it, people may have been given it, people may have earned it, people may have not. The only way to know is by asking. But somehow we've perpetuated this idea of old guard leather and how there was some kind of standard that was across the entire leather community, that this is exactly how things were done, and these were the rituals, and these were the traditions, and all the things, and it's just not true.
It's just what you decide. It's the same with all of it, right? Whether or not it's kink or leather or dynamics, power exchanges, leather houses, like it's what you want it to be. It's literally whatever you dream, whatever you imagine, whatever you really desire, that's what you get to make it. And like I said, even with us, did earn his cover from his mentor, and he decided that was something that was meaningful for him. He wanted to put that effort in. There is a comparison for the S-types. It's not as commonly represented or talked about or anything, which is the cunt cap or the garrison cap. I have one. I was not presented it. I bought it because it looks damn good on my head. Because I decided I didn't want to put all of that into it. Mainly, I would love if there was an equivalent because I've earned something. I suppose it's on my back, isn't it? But for me, I didn't want to put all of that into it, and I just wanted to wear this hat. But I had that moment because I didn't even know it was a thing until 2 years into our title stuff, because I put it out on Facebook, like, why isn't there a thing like it? I should be able to understand as you do. And someone had mentioned the garrison cap tradition, and it's like, yes, some people do, but even if I saw someone walking around a dungeon in a garrison cap, I would never automatically assume that person is a slave or that they earned it. I honestly would assume you think you look good in a hat and it cost you $50. And I had this moment of, oh, well, crap, he's putting all of this stuff into, and this feeling into the stuff, and now I can't wear my garrison cap. And it took about 6 months to a year when I'm tired of seeing that thing in there, because otherwise I'm never going to wear it again. Done.
And I will preface this by, this is my opinion. But going back to that piece with the boot blacks and keeping leather perfect and shiny and all the things, I think a lot of that came in with some of these same things, with people kind of leaning one way or the other. Mm-hmm. And definitely in the motorcycle club world, having a well-used, well-worn piece of leather is something to be proud of.
Yes.
In my path, I started there again. I came in from the motorcycle club when came into leather and kind of drifted over to that. No, I need to have a high shine on my boots all the time, and I need to have everything looking like it just came off the rack. It's perfect and conditioned.
So annoying trying to get ready with you.
And I'm starting to kind of drift back the other way, because as much as I love that, as much as I love seeing people learning leather care, things like that, like I do a lot of my own boot blacking. I love to get a high shine on a pair of boots. I've got a pair of corcoran jump boots, if any of you know what those are. Nice hard leather with a toe cap. So it gives you a nice line where you can stop shining through the high shine bit. Makes me really happy if I can get like a mirror finish on these. But I've also come back around to seeing the value in not everything has to look brand new. Not everything has to be perfect.
And not everything has to be leather. Any conference that we go to, I always make a point of wearing something that is faux leather, because there's this idea that you're not leather unless it's real leather and it's actually been sacrificed by a creature. And like I said, that shit's expensive. And it's elitist to say that someone cannot be leather if they cannot afford to wear a real piece of leather. So even with our title and all of the things, people expect me to wear real leather. I'm like, nope, this is a faux leather dress. And there's so many people that you talk to that, well, it's not real leather. Almost like they're like, please don't judge me, but I'm not real leather because it's not real leather. I'm like, I don't give a crap. And it wasn't until, did you want to explain the way that you saw that? Okay, I'll just go. I've got no idea what I'm talking about. No. So one of the things that he said that we say to a lot of people, even if you are butt naked, you are still wearing leather.
Exactly.
You are wrapped in it. It is not about your clothing. It is about who you are. And every single one of us is like, all of the outside of us is leather. It's just untreated and still walking around. Hopefully, well, no, actually, I was going to say, maybe not mooing, but no, I know a couple of people actually. or oinking. Yeah.
And yeah, that is a great point, is people need to have a way to access it to get started. And yes, absolutely, real leather has a smell, it has a feel. It's nearly impossible to completely clean. And so it absorbs all that energy, all the smells and the fluids.
The hugs.
Everything that comes into contact with it. There's an element of that. It becomes kind of history that you can wear. Because it kind of has that memory of all those different things you've done. And if it was yours that you started with a brand new piece, then it's got all those things. You remember back when we did this, remember at the club we did that, and remember that night, if it was gifted leather, if it was something you've inherited or was passed down, all the more, because it carries all that with it. So there's absolutely something to be said for it being real leather, but that shouldn't be a reason for folks that are interested in leather and wanting to identify as leather to be held back. Because for a lot of us, even if that was your only priority in life and you really didn't have to eat, sometimes that may take a month or two to buy that really nice piece. It may take longer than that. I got real excited when I learned about Westco boots. And
then you found out the price tag.
Because they do, I don't know if you're familiar with them. For those of you who aren't, it's a company out of, they're just outside of Portland, Oregon in the States. And you can literally show up at their shop. They will measure your feet and build a special last, which is the thing that they build shoes on, that are yours. And they will keep that kind of on file, and anytime you want to buy a new pair of boots, they will get your feet, basically, and build you a custom pair that fit you perfectly. I got super excited. I'm like, I want to do that. And then I started pricing it out, and one pair of boots was almost $1,000, at least for the ones I wanted. And I don't mind spending money on leather, but that's a lot of money to spend on one pair of boots.
And if he gets to spend that on a pair of boots.
So then I've got to basically budget three times. So that's probably never going to happen. But again, making it accessible for people is something that we've really tried to do. But
well, not off-putting as well. Like there's this idea that the leather community is really cliquey and private and hard to get into. And don't get me wrong, that is definitely the case in a lot of situations. We even ran into that when we were starting our leather journey, of really not knowing where to go because everywhere we went, the door was shut in our face. Some of that was just bad timing, I will say. We just were not in the right place at the right time. There's transitions in leadership and whatnot. But there's also a reason that is a assumption. And again, it's because we were private and closed off, because during the AIDS crisis, it was how you kept you and your group safe, is by being closed off and not inviting people in that you didn't know. Unfortunately, some people just think that's tradition instead of a requirement at the time. So we have to create these spaces for people to ask questions or find out what's going on, or just experiment. Like, what's wrong with trying something out? Like, when I don't know if it's in here. I didn't come out as kinky until I moved to the States, because it's all out. It's great. But there's so many times where if someone says that they're doing something or trying something, whether or not it's puppy, little, pronouns, that once you've said it, that's now your identity, and you are that thing. So unless you are 100% certain that that's exactly what you want to do, you just don't try, because you don't want to be seen as someone that's minimizing it or not taking it seriously, because there are people that it's a huge pillar of who they are. So we're left with these people that are often resentful on the fringes, looking at all of these people doing the things that they really want to try, but they don't feel like they can, because they do just want to dabble. They want to try it out. They want to see how it feels.
So with that, kind of brings us up to the 90s. And I think that probably the biggest change in the community in the 90s was kind of the surge in pan leather, or pansexual community engaging in leather activities.
As I get my pan bottle.
Things like that. And there were I think good and bad things about that. There's still people that have strong opinions one way or the other. But whichever way you fall on that argument of whether or not it's appropriate or acceptable for example, straight folks to identify as leather, it's the reality. And a lot of the things that have come since then, whether it's big events, conferences, the weekend hotel takeover events, things like that, a lot of that has been driven by the pansexual community. In our hometown, our main event for years was Thunder in the Mountains.
That was huge.
One of the largest events in the world.
50,000 square foot dungeon.
And
Wow.
generally, roughly 2,000, give or take, depending on the year.
People.
Folks showing up. Big event. It started strictly as a gay men's event. And as long as it was a strictly gay men's event, it stayed fairly small. There are a lot of people who love that about it. So I'm not saying that was a bad thing. But as it started to grow, as it became more acceptable for folks outside of strictly gay communities to show up, it grew really fast.
They also have a place. Like that's one of the things that frustrates me the most about that argument, especially when, again, I'm just going to stop saying it, in the States, with our pride marches, we've had a lot of pushback about the leather community having a contingent in the march, because leather isn't inherently gay, queer, whatever word it is that you want to use there. And even with just the history that we've told you, regardless, leather has a place at Pride.
I agree.
That is my opinion. I will not budge on it. We deserve to be represented in that march every single year, but we're frequently told that we don't belong. And especially as a couple that presents as a het-normative white couple, neither of us is straight, and I'm the only white one. So that's also like immediately like, let's not judge a book by its cover, because you're really starting to piss me off. Just because we've ended up in a relationship that looks that way, it doesn't mean our sexuality has changed, and we still get to be there. 99.
There was something really cool that I had in my mind. Like, I'm going to say this because she made me think of it. But I just have to wait for the finish. It may come back. So yeah, as that started to change, some of the title things started to change as well. Most of the titles for years were individual titles. So like we're talking about IML and Mr. Drummer and things like that. Someone wanted to run for title, they ran for title, that was the thing. In the 90s, we started to see couples titles. And so that's what ours is. We, with the International Master Slave, we run as a pair, and we win or lose as a pair. We also have the International Power Exchange track, and we'll explain kind of the difference between ours, what we do and what they do. But we kind of started to see those happen. And for a long time, it was kind of the same thing. They were fundraisers. They were ways to bring community together. Mostly, it was kind of all in good fun.
Mm-hmm.
In '99, we had an event called Mass '99. And Mass, for those of you unfamiliar, is Masters and Slaves Together.
And you used to have a chapter in the UK, and it doesn't exist anymore. So I encourage whoever is into that sort of thing to maybe reach out to the international group to start one up. Just saying, it would be nice.
And so for us at Mass '99, it was a big shift. And a lot of what they realized was education is something that was really badly needed. People were excited about doing the things, but we didn't really have that tradition anymore. We had a lot of people that were coming into it fresh. They weren't kind of coming up in that community. They were discovering it as an adult and wandering in with no idea what they're doing. How do I throw a flogger? How do I throw a single tail without seriously injuring someone or myself?
Which we've heard more of those stories than the other ones.
And so at Mass '99, the focus of our title shifted, and it really became focused on education. Other titles have done similar things. The Power Exchange, International Power Exchange does that.
International Personal Leather, or any of the personal leather titles, are considered to be an educational title.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of different tracks. IML is still kind of the original.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, Mr. Drummer is not a thing anymore, but they do still have Limited Drummer.
If you ever get a chance, if you ever get a chance to go to their camp at Ramblewood, well, it's a great event. It's literally the whole thing, acres and just fields and cabins and people going at it. It's great. Their patch tradition is to see how many people you can get to come on their patch. So the last one literally walked around with a patch, put it under people, and just started fisting. It was great.
And so from there, we kind of dive into what the titles look like and like why we did it, how we did it, things like that. But for ours in particular, we have 3 different levels that we had to get through. So we start at the state level. And so for us, that's Colorado. So we won Colorado Master and Slave in 2019.
Then coded.
All of our, within our title track, all of the contests are structured to be pretty close to the same because they want to prepare you for the next step. And so for our contest, we're judged on 5 categories. The first one is kind of the catch-all, and it's observed dynamic. And so they watch how the two of us interact over the course of the weekend. They can bring in, if they've noticed, because the judges will know that they're judging, and they'll know who's running well in advance of that weekend. So they'll start looking us up on Facebook. They'll look up FatLife. They'll see if they catch us at a conference, if we're teaching, if we're presenting, if we're just hanging out and chit-chatting with folks. They'll start to observe all that, and all of that can be pulled into that category. From there, they have the one that I really hate the most, which is pop questions. And the intention I get is to get you think, basically make sure you can think on your feet.
Please. Oh, can I? I love when I get to tell this story because it's embarrassing for you.
So one of the things that's pretty common with the title holders is we do run pins, and it's a fundraiser. It helps us pay for trips like coming out to talk to you. And you got to think of ideas for what you're going to do and that people are going to want to buy and all that. So,
Sir's Southwest pop question was: if your butthole was an animal, what animal would it be? And Sir answers, well, I've always been told to say the first thing that pops into your head with these hence pop questions. So I'm going to have to go with hungry hippos. So we're dying, and within 24 hours of winning that match, I think it's 12 hours of winning that contest, I had them ordered. That's just got to be a thing.
So, and that's pretty typical of a pop question. It can be ridiculous things like if your partner were a Subway sandwich.
Oh, I hate that one. I don't even like sandwiches. Yeah.
Things like that. Or it can be more serious things like,
What's the most special individual thing about your MS dynamic, which is what I got. I said it was his dick.
So that's pop question. Generally, you get one question apiece. You're judged on that. It's the one thing you can't really prepare for because you have no idea what the question is going to be. It has to be serious or not, or hungry hippos. There's no way to know.
But if you do ever decide to do this, I have a strategy for you. You just got to ask.
And then after that, we have speeches. And so for our track, we each have 2 minutes to give a speech. And it can be about anything. They prefer that it's something relating to at least something lifestyle related or preferably MS dynamics.
Class.
We do a 10-minute presentation together. And again, that was something that was new after 99 when they shifted focus to education. They were basically looking at how do we create presenters. And so they wanted to see how well are these people going to do as presenters. Are they going to be engaging? Are they going to be scared and unwilling to speak and have stage fright and that kind of thing?
Or the opposite, are they going to be a condescending prick?
Yeah.
Obviously, you two failed that category.
I like to think we do okay.
That's actually where the class next came from. That's the full version of our 10 minutes in Southwest.
And I'm using so the speech, the class, hot question, observe dynamic, and
I've forgotten all the four that you just said.
Interview?
Thank you! Wifey for the win!
and the interview process basically looks like, and ours are open, so anyone that's at the conference and would like to sit in on it are able to. But we sit in, we usually have an interview, we usually have a judging panel of 7. And it's kind of fair game. They get to ask about our relationship, they get to ask questions about the community.
If they notice something on FetLife that they want clarification around, or they didn't like and they want you to explain it, like they can pull from anything.
And so they kind of put you on the hot seat. And usually that runs anywhere from half an hour to an hour.
Does not feel that long.
Usually feels like it went a lot quicker than we expected. And then by the end of the weekend, they add all those up. If there's no one running against you, if you're the only couple running, you still have to make at least 70% of the points.
Most contests run that way as well.
As long as there are multiple couples running, and both couples have gotten more than 70%, whoever scores the highest wins. And then from there, they kind of expect you to go out and do what we're doing today. And so they do some fundraising for you. They have you do a lot of your own fundraising as well to try to pay for some of that.
And like when the titles are the starter titles, so like our Colorado one, the travel fund didn't need to be that big because you're expected to stay in your state because that's what you're representing. Southwest, a little bit bigger because you're expected, for our region, it's 9 states, including Hawaii, which is really expensive to get to. We did not get to Hawaii, unfortunately. And then with international, generally, it's also a bigger event. People know what's expected. And to be honest, even with a really good, substantial travel fund, a lot of people find that it's still not enough to get to where it is that they want to get to. And I think a lot of them put more pressure on themselves than the community necessarily does, of they want to make sure that people know that they made the right choice and they're doing their best and stuff. I definitely fall into that at least. And it gets a little sticky at times because you're trying to justify the cost with what you're doing. And we fell into that trap coming out here of, well, we're spending, that's a lot. So then I'm like, okay, so we have at least 5 things that we're doing during that time. And if you think about it, that's actually quite a lot. But for us, it was like, no, we need another thing and another thing. Like, we're busy every single day to make it feel like it was worth us doing, because we felt like we weren't doing enough, or we feel like that imposter syndrome.
And there's that element of, the communities come together to help you raise these funds. You want to be a good steward of those funds and recognize that effort, not just waste it.
And I even said, I made a post about it on Facebook before it came out. It wasn't just so excited to go to England and France and Germany and all these places, it's going to be great. It was, you guys are doing this. You did this. You are the reason that I'm here. And oh my goodness, I'm so grateful. Thank you to everyone who volunteered, donated, won an auction item, like every single person that donated 50 cents, all their time, which is just as valuable. They're the reasons that we get to be here. This is really weird because it's usually me.
What I was going to say was an important thing to note, though, is in talking to former title holders, it's really common to have people that are in one of two camps. And you have the folks that, kind of like us, I mean, our title journey has lasted a little longer than anyone expected it to, because we had that
COVID talk.
That global pandemic thing happened midway through. As we started in 2019, we should have competed after Colorado. We should have competed for Southwest in 2020, International in 21, and we would have stepped down and been completely done by 22. And in 22 in March, we were finally competing for International and just beginning our International year. But for us, it's something that we talk about as having been one of the greatest things we've done.
You will never do anything better.
It's strengthened our relationship. It's strengthened our dynamic. It's done amazing things for us. But there's also folks on the other side that will tell you, oh, be careful. Titles are relationship killers. And the unfortunate thing is there are a lot of title holders out there who have had that experience. And they go into it, whether it's a couple's title or an individual title. It can be really difficult. Because if you're going somewhere together, the title holder is going to get a little more recognition. They're going to get a little bit of that star treatment sometimes. And the other person's going to feel a little left out.
Or if you are in a couple's title, that's a lot of pressure to be watched for that long, especially when you put a lot of pressure on yourself like we do. It's a lot. It can be a lot. But again, just it pushes you into a place that it's hard to imagine ever getting there without this. Because every single thing that we go to, we learn something, we get closer in a way, we think of a new class, all of these different things. But more than that, like you said, like it bonded us in a way that we never would have expected. We just expected to do the thing, have fun, teach some classes, but just the exponential growth that is kind of required. But it doesn't feel like you're being like forced into it. It feels like you're being brought into it. Of like, oh, I learned this quicker because of this, or we were talking about writing this class together, or we did a class and someone made a comment, or we had an aha moment, and then there's a whole class of it. And yeah, it's just been incredible.
So I know we're pretty much at the top of the hour. I did want to say one other thing, and this isn't to discourage anyone. It's actually quite the opposite. But the other thing that we hear a lot with folks that have done titles is the expense behind it. There have been folks that have basically like driven themselves to bankruptcy because they wanted to do all the things, didn't want to say no to anyone that asked.
You cannot do all the things.
You can't do that. So, two things. One was hearing that they were relationship killers before we ran was something I am so grateful for, which is why I'm sharing it with them. Because we went into it already planning for what strategies do we need to have in place, what do we need to do to make sure that we're communicating, that we're reserving time for ourselves, for our relationship,
For our kids,
for our
for
wife,
our wives.
And making sure that we don't get caught up in that spiral and where we don't have time for each other, everything gets stretched too thin. And looking at budget, looking at what we can afford, looking at how much time we can actually afford to do things, what things are really important to us, and being intentional about them. And I really believe those two things are the biggest things that make that difference between the folks that come out of it saying, holy shit, that was the most amazing thing I've ever done. And oh my God, I feel like I was used by my community and I wish I'd never done it.
Burnout.
So having said that, if anyone has questions, if you're thinking about writing, if you want more information about it, we may not have all of the answers, especially about other title tracks, but we generally have some, and we can absolutely point you in the direction of folks that would have more.
And just really quick, so obviously with our title stuff, and we really, the MS title has never been outside of the continental US, ever. A lot of us would love to see more people from other countries, other regions getting out there, and it can be difficult, but that's kind of why we came here. Because I'm from here, I wanted to bring it back. Sir was born in Germany. We both get to go back to our countries of birth during this title year, and it's because we wanted to bring it here and talk about it, because I would have had a much different experience if I knew a lot of this stuff was even an option. And a lot of people think that the MS title specifically isn't an option if you don't live inside the continental US, and that is not the case. It is open to anyone outside of that who wants to compete for it. So we really encourage people to ask questions. If there's just a small piece you're interested in, please reach out and ask. So I know we're going into like other time. Sorry.
I was going to say, if I can just wrap this one up
Yep.
and say thank you for sharing the time on this, and then we can spin on to the next one.
Mm-hmm. If anyone's leaving this one and wants our contact information, I have a QR code that you can scan and it will take you to all of our stuff, which I will get
Cool.
now. Thank you, sir.
So just thank you, everyone.